Laura. Okay, it is 1 minute after 7, and we will start this meeting of the City of Kenmore Planning Commission. The first order of business is citizen comments, and I see a number of people out there, and I believe there is a sign-up sheet that we will work from. And just as a reminder, when you render comments, please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes to share your thoughts with us. So Maura will call you up.
Bethany?
Hello. Sorry, this is my first time.
Go ahead and speak right into the microphone and put your name and address and fire away.
My name and address?
Just state your name and address for the record, yes, please.
I'm Bethany Virgillo. I don't know my address. Yeah, sorry. I'm here for a school thing. I didn't know exactly what this was for, so I didn't think of anything. I didn't know I was going to be first.
Sure, why don't you do likewise? That's fine. Don't.
Okay.
Hang right there. That's fine, Bethany.
Timothy Virgillo, I'm her father.
Great.
They're coming in through a school thing, so them having some kind of bounded idea of what they should be talking about at this would be very helpful. For you, I know that you're passionate about where you walk and the parks, particularly Squires Landing, so you could speak to those points if you choose to.
Like good things or bad things?
Whatever comes to mind that you want to give input on.
Sure. Sure.
I think that the trails and stuff are really, really, really important. I'm kind of, it's not that I'm exactly disappointed that there's only one, like, long one. Like, that's awesome. It can go from, like, here all the way down to Woodinville, which is great. But I think since we're really hilly here, like, there's a lot of hills, especially, like, all the way up that hill, it makes it really awkward to walk up, and there's a lot of kids up there that can't do anything or go anywhere without a vehicle, especially. And this school is really close by as well, and it would be really, like, to have a trail that goes, like, all the way to the school would be, like, really sweet. And I know that a lot of kids have to walk to school, like, if they miss, like, the bus or something, and it's kind of dangerous, especially those people who go, like, way too fast around a corner, or there's, like, trees you have to walk through. I'm not saying to tear down the trees, because that's awful. There's actually a lot of torn down trees recently, isn't there, in Kenmore, for houses no one can even afford, so it's just a waste of trees. Sorry, off topic. Sorry. I don't know other points to make.
Anything more you want to say?
I could think of a lot of things. It's just hard on the spot.
You are at 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Bethany. We would love to hear from you. Another option is if you want to write something and send it to us via the city. We'd be more than happy to consider it in that way if that's a little easier and more comfortable for you.
I wrote a letter actually.
Okay, if you want to
So
make that part of the record or write something else, that would be just fine too in terms of public comment.
okay. Is that it?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ethan Fisher.
Hi, I'm Ethan Fisher, and I also live at 7711 Northeast 175th Street. And this is my first time attending one of these, and I was wondering what you guys do exactly.
What do we do? Well, we're the Planning Commission. We're an advisory body for the City Council, and we work a lot on the comprehensive plan and planning elements for the city. So we're all appointed by the City Council to do a lot of planning. This particular plan that is on our agenda tonight is the Parks and Recreation Plan. So we are basically a planning body for the city.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Tracy Banasinski.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Bonashinsky, and I live at 5863 Northeast 197th Street in Kenmore. I live here with my 7-year-old mother and my 7-year-old son, and we all love it here in Kenmore. Before I begin, I'd like to thank you, the members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for your public service, and thank you for providing this forum for public comment. I really appreciate your dedication and your hard work on behalf of Kenmore. So I'm here because I have a vision for a more beautiful Kenmore and for salmon recovery as the driving force behind making that vision a reality. Kenmore has major historical and present-day salmon runs in our watershed, giving us the wonderful and huge responsibility of being good stewards to a fish that is important symbolically to the Pacific Northwest and sacred to the indigenous peoples who have been on this land since time immemorial. Salmon co-evolve with the land we are on, with the Sammamish River and Swamp Creek, Little Swamp Creek, and all the waterways that flow through Kenmore on their way to the Salish Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Because they co-evolve with this land, restoring healthy salmon habitat is also restoring habitat that is beneficial to other native fish, insects, birds, and animals. And people need what salmon need too. We need water in our rivers, streams, and lakes that is cold, clear, and clean. And we need healthy land that can support our continued existence. I believe that using salmon recovery as a lens when making decisions about Kenmore's parks will allow us to make sound decisions about how to steward the land that is in our care. I scanned the current draft of the pros plan. It was very long. I'll take time to read it later. I saw mention of how important our natural spaces are and how important environmental restoration efforts are, but I did not see reference to salmon recovery in particular. I am here to invite the Planning Commission to learn more about the Raya 8 Salmon Recovery Plan that organizes itself around the needs of Chinook salmon, currently a federally listed threatened species, and includes the Sammamish River. Some or all of you might already be familiar with the Raya 8 Recovery Plan. If so, that's great. I hope you will continue to learn more and to incorporate your knowledge into recommendations to the Council. Either way, I would love to talk with you at length about what a really healthy riparian or nearshore zone looks like and the importance of unarmored river and lake shores. I ask you to commit to learning from fish biologists and salmon habitat restoration specialists so that your recommendations are informed by science and current best practices. I ask you to commit to recommending the creation of robust and healthy riparian zones in all of our parks where land meets water, and to removing armors and revetments on our rivers and lakes wherever possible. These are things I don't see in current plans for Log Boom Park or Squires Landing, and I'm concerned about that. I don't know what the mechanism for continued conversation about this is, but I look forward to working with you in the future as a voice for salmon and healthy salmon habitat in Kenmore. Salmon are a really beautiful fish that have my heart. They have an amazing life story, and I'm confident.
I'm sorry, you're at 3 minutes.
Okay, I have one more sentence. I'm confident that if we make salmon recovery an explicit and serious component of the PROS plan, we will be creating a beautiful and amazing future for Kenmore. So thank you for your attention and your consideration.
Great. Thank you, Tracy.
Timothy Virgilio.
My name is Timothy Virgilio, 7711 Northeast 175th Street, which puts me right next to where Squires Landing is coming in. I spend a lot of time actually walking in Kenmore. I'm working out of the business incubator, and I speak a lot with local businesses. And what I want to share as a concern is the symbiotic nature that parks have to have with the population in order for it to actually have any kind of sustainability or future that moves forward for people outside of people that drive cars. So we're already bisected by the slough, we're already bisected by the road, and there's not a lot of ways for people to actually get around from the population centers to the parks where they can actually pursue park kind of activities. With that kind of thing in mind, it's important to know that the support for the parks are going to be coming from the people who actually can attend them. So the whole Disney model of you get the kids, you get the parents, you get the grandparents, and you get them from generations. And I think that's important to acknowledge. And I don't see that kind of planning from what I've seen from the documentation that I see available. I don't see the bigger picture when I see stuff that happens for Love Notes for Kenmore or with the business incubator, or when I'm talking to other small businesses or medium-sized businesses in Kenmore. I don't see how all these things are pulling together to create a better system or a bigger system. And they need to be building blocks for the big picture of what we're trying to actually put forward here, which is not a bedroom community. It's not about getting people to stop as they're driving on somewhere else. It's about the people here wanting to remain here. So even with the breweries and the manufacturing that we have, it's kind of ad hoc in the way it's located and the way it's working. So it makes it difficult for business that wants to hire or continue to grow to actually grow within Kenmore. They almost always have to grow outside of Kenmore. They outgrow us. So yeah, I think that's about the points that I wanted to raise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie Barr.
Hi, my name is Katie. I live at 6325 Northeast 157th Street, Kenmore. And I was wondering what your guys' plans were to deal with an increasing number of panhandlers popping up. Like there's one on I think it's 68th Avenue and Bop Away, and he's there every day, always just out there asking for money and stuff. And then there's an increasing number starting to show up at Safeway. So they'll be at the exit on the Bop Away near the subway, and then they'll be at the one closer to the Domino's. Then there will be a multiple of them at the exit on that road right there, or that road right there. I forget the street number, but they're always leaving trash, and then some of them can get kind of aggressive. And there have been some at the very entrance of Safeway asking for money or food as you come in and out, and it's just making it feel kind of uncomfortable to go by yourself. And, I'm a teenage girl and I'm kind of small, so I can get kind of intimidated about it.
Well, if you're asking a question, I think your point is certainly valid. That's really beyond the scope of what the Planning Commission does. So I would encourage.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I would encourage you to go to the City Council and share your thoughts. The City Council meets, I believe it's almost every Monday throughout the month. So they're the folks who I think you would be best served to address directly for this. But thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Tiffany, I'm sorry, I had a question for you if you don't mind. Tiffany?
Katie.
Oh, Katie, I'm sorry. Katie. If you want, sure. I'm just interested to know what ideas you might have as a way for our city to address the panhandling situation that you identified. What are some ideas that either you or your friends might have talked about?
I don't know a lot yet, because I've only started recently noticing it, but maybe having, I don't know, just signs that say don't help panhandlers. I know those can't be super effective, but it's just helping people know that they're not actually in need of money, because some of the people will be I don't need job, or if you offer them help, they'll be I don't need a place to stay, I don't need a job, and they just ask for money. So maybe helping raise public awareness that if we give them money, it's only encouraging them to stay longer. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Phyllis Finley.
Phyllis Finley, 5962 Northeast Arrowhead Drive. I'm requesting that as you wrestle with the various demands of the PROS plan, that you pay very, very close attention to the results of the statistically validated survey that the City of Kenmore did in January as to what the respondents felt that they needed and wanted. I think that maybe could be your guiding light. Also, I'm requesting that you make public the summary of the comments from the September 25th open house regarding the PROS plan. There were lots of sticky notes up, but it's kind of hard once we leave there to figure out, where the direction that was going, and I couldn't find it on the website, and I requested a copy of that and didn't get a reply, so if there would be some way that that could be made public, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was our last citizen commenter.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to share comments? You don't necessarily have to sign up beforehand to do so. Come on up.
Hello, I'm Xander Jones. I live on 14465 Simons Road Northeast. It's kind of like bordering between Kirkland, Kenmore. It's like all over the place. But the school I go to is in Kenmore, so I came to this one. The biggest thing for me is financial situation with housing. I've been living in the same apartment complex for ever since I was 2 years old, and I'm 17 now. It's not a very great place. There's alcohol misuse, lots of terrible things. And me and my mother have been looking in Kenmore and looking for a better housing option, because we've been living in this place for so long. We want to move because it's very toxic and it's not a very good environment. And like the houses around here, not just in Kenmore, Kirkland, Bothell, everywhere really around this area is really expensive. And this is a question for whoever would like to answer. I don't know if this is in your hands, but I was wondering, are you guys like trying to figure out anything to do with, like, one of my ideas, but this just costs more money in the end, it's like maybe building more low-income housing around here. But unfortunately, there's more buildings around here, and if anything, that just costs more money for the community. So I understand greatly that this money could be used towards other issues, maybe even greater. But I would just like to hear if you have an opinion on this.
We have lots of opinions. You've hit on obviously a very important topic that we've, as a planning commission, we've addressed it. I know recently in a couple of ways. One is mostly in the way of sort of preserving affordable housing. We've worked on the mobile home communities around Kenmore as one example. Another thing we're working on currently, not tonight, but as what are called accessory dwelling units, which are basically backyard cottages or mother-in-law cottages as a way to help provide additional housing and address, at least to some extent, the housing affordability issue. But that's a huge issue, not only in Kenmore, as you know, but the entire, as you suggested, the whole area. And yes, anybody else is welcome to chime in. This is, we could probably spend hours and hours on housing affordability. You've hit on a very important topic that we're in our own small way trying to address, and I know the City Council likewise that's a priority for the City Council as well. So again, I'd encourage you to come to the City Council and share your thoughts with them as well. Anybody else have any thoughts without spending the rest of the evening on that? Great. Well, thank you for your comments.
Thank you. This is my first time, so I was a little nervous, but this is fun. Thank you.
You did great. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Everybody, I'm Karen Prince. We live up by Arrowhead Elementary on 65th Avenue Northeast. Been here for over 30 years now. Just because I just love the idea of open spaces, so I guess I wasn't not prepared to say anything except please keep spaces open. We're losing trees. I don't hear the birds. I don't see the birds in my backyard, and we're against a green belt up there by Arrowhead. So I just want to protect as much as we can. So when you're thinking about, and I came to the September open house and lots of little sticky notes, and I agree with Phyllis. Would like to, and maybe that's what you're doing tonight, is putting out what happened or where you're going from there. One of the things I thought, and I've seen this in traveling, is big, wonderful equipment in some parks for people to exercise, all ages, not just the usual slides and things that we have at St. Edward's, but some very wonderful equipment. I left some pictures there. So equipment, encourage exercise, encourage getting out and walking in the forest. And I have a special plea. I don't know how much you are involved with the St. Edward ball field, but I'm very much nervous and worried that should be kept. That is something so precious. So I guess that's what I would like to say. A good thank you for all the things you do to keep open spaces and to keep nature. Because as more and more studies show, we all need to get out. Children all the way up to my age, and I'm getting up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else who hasn't already spoken who'd like to share any comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate we appreciate your thoughts and comments there. Our next item of business is the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan. So we'll ask our city staff to join us at the front table for that, once they're done with their other work there. Before you get started, I was wondering if you could maybe address just a couple of the points that were made that I think are sort of germane, certainly to the Parks Plan. One is about the comments, the availability of the comments at the September open house, and the second was about the connections from population centers to park. That's, I think, a central part of what we're hoping to do with the plan. But if you wouldn't mind addressing those two, Lori, for the folks who commented.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, good evening.
Good evening.
And this is a perfect segue to say that, as Debbie Bent advised you at the last meeting, our primary staff person and Debbie are both unavailable this evening. So, I am pinch hitting, and with me is Juliette Vong with HBB Landscape Architecture. She's the consultant who's worked on this project. I will tell you that I saw the pros plan for the first time about a week ago. So I am not going to be the expert this evening. I'm trying my best, but but you'll have to forgive me if I do not have the answers at my fingertips. As for the comments, I actually tried to send an email to Ms. Finley. I'm not sure what happened there, to explain that we do not have them compiled in the document itself. That will be an appendix to the document, and I think it is being undertaken as we speak, but the intern who's been working on that will not be in the office until Thursday. So again, when you see this plan again on December 3rd, presumably all of the appendices will be attached, and the summary of comments will be part of that document. So we are planning to get that to you, but we don't have it yet.
Sure.
As for the second question about connections, I know several of the projects in the Parks Plan have to do with connections. There's one specific one we're going to talk about tonight, which is interesting given the public comment relating to connections to Inglemoor High School and how what the feasibility and interest is in a trail that's currently in the plan connecting Rhododendron Park, Morelands Park, which in fact that's why I brought the map so we can look at that in a little bit, but that's very close to Inglemoor. So,
That's great, Lori, thank you.
okay. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of background. I think you're well aware of this project. You started reviewing it in April, and the last section you reviewed was on September 3rd. The open house followed that on September 25th, as did the conclusion of the 3-question survey, the informal survey. This is not the statistically valid survey. This is an informal survey. I think there were about 500 responses to that survey. But information about that is in the materials. I can tell you where it is. There's a summary on pages 10 and 11, and then some more information on page 46 specifically. And in the version that you're looking at tonight, this is the consolidation of all the independent little things you've reviewed over maybe 5 meetings. And to highlight for you changes that were prompted by your discussions, we've put the most significant amendments in red text. So hopefully that will help you sort out what is substantively different from what you've seen before. I wanted to highlight 3 changes in particular. One is that throughout the plan, we've added more language about partnering for programming. This was something you raised at the September 3rd meeting. And so in several different places, we talk about the importance of programming, but note that the city is probably not going to take the lead role in that. That will be something we would do as we currently do with other entities. I also wanted to call out that the acquisition proposals, you had raised a question on September 3rd about leaving the acquisition so far in the future that there was no land left to be acquired. So we tried to move some of that information into more the middle term time frame. And then the last thing that Juliet wanted me to point out is that the horizon year for the plan was changed from 2035 to 2040. So many of the numbers will look different from what you looked at initially, but I think the same way to move forward with increased population, I think it was a straight line projection, is still in place, so there's no change in relative relationship there. So with that, I am ready to answer questions or take comments. Again, this will come back to you on December 3rd. Hopefully the final version ready for your recommendation with the appendices.
Well, how would you like to proceed? It's about a 100-page document.
Yeah. Again, hopefully you've seen the pieces. It's just putting them all together.
Yeah, I know we all have and read it. I'm just wondering what the most efficient way is to go through whatever questions or comments by section, or just open it up to general comments. Anybody have any preference on that? How we move through it? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed what.
Oh, Suzanne said by sections because it's so kind of voluminous. Okay, let's do it by sections then, just to make our process flow a little more smoothly here. So maybe start at the beginning.
Would it help if we just kind of walked section by section a little bit through the changes?
That would be a very good way to help.
Okay.
Sure.
Do you want me to launch into this?
That's fine with me. We'll give you a brief introduction to the introduction,
Okay.
and then you can, we'll go section by section. Yeah.
Great.
So I would take the introduction is really just a conglomeration. There's not a lot of context or in-depth to it. It really is just a quick paragraph to introduce the document and then jump really quickly into the planning context, because that's kind of more newer information, I think, than what you didn't have in the previous plan. So you had a short introduction in some of your previous documents. We pulled that was like an introduction to the demand and need analysis that you saw previously. We pulled that out of the demand and need analysis and really put it into this introduction statement and just expanded on it a little bit more. I think the critical elements in here are the demographics. We expanded quite a bit more, pulling predominantly from the comprehensive plan, but also from more recent information from the census. And you'll see in red, this is also where we introduced the new planning year to 2020. And then the other element that I'd call attention to would be the resources and relevant planning documents. We really wanted to establish what we used as the basis for this PROS plan. So it went back to its relationship to GMA, the importance to the comprehensive plan and the state's Office of Recreation and Conservation Office, RCO, which handles all of the grants, as well as a couple of the other planning documents and resources that we used to have the basis for trends and a lot of the statements we used in the basis of the plans. Are there any questions or comments or any of those sections?
I had one, maybe just a factual clarification. I see on, I believe it's page 6 in this document about the projections of growth and the population projection of 30,000 by 2040. I had heard in some other contexts, including some of the city council, I think election information, that it was going to be 40,000 by 2040, Kenmore's population. So I just wanted to clarify that projection of population in Kenmore by 2040.
I don't have a more recent number. We have numbers in our comprehensive plan currently to 2030. Let's see, it'd be the 20-year horizon, so 2035, and then the projection was just a straight line projection beyond that to 2040. But we don't have a 2040 number that has come to us.
The numbers are based on the Puget Sound Regional Council assigns a population projection to each area, and they don't have numbers out for 2040 yet. So
you're doing your, okay.
other number was used might have been a projection based on other resources or other documents or from another other process. But since we only really rely back to the Puget Sound Regional Council numbers, we just did a straight projection. We just literally calculated the math.
Okay.
So do you think that the results of the 2020 census would update what King County's values are?
So in preparation for the 2023 comprehensive plan update, what will happen, we'll have the census information. The state will provide us an overall number for King County, and then that we are to plan for. And then all the jurisdictions in the county join together, and based on an approach to growth, which at the moment is looking like it will trend toward more growth near transit, negotiations occur, and then a city is assigned a target, and that is the number that we move forward with. So it's based on a really big number, and then the combination of land use and future planning determines what the target is going to be. So yes, we will be doing that for the next comprehensive plan update, not for this project.
Right, we just don't have the information.
Right.
Okay.
Just maybe perhaps some attribution, I guess, for that figure. Maybe it's going to be in the final document, with a little more.
For which figure?
For the population figure that you're using.
To be more descriptive, that it's
Yes,
based
more
on
how we
Puget
got
Sound of
there.
2035
Yes.
extrapolated to.
Yeah,
Okay.
as a footnote or something, just,
Okay.
yeah, so.
Here's why this becomes a little bit concerning to me, and maybe this is that tiny screaming auditor that every now and then makes my life miserable. But we base so much of our work on the population projections, everything from affordable housing to how we zone things. So it makes me nervous when we start moving the base and we don't have any science behind it. So this is more of an editorial comment, but I think we definitely need to footnote that 2040 number in a big way to say that this is what this is that it's a 5-year straight line out, and it'll probably change. And to the extent that it's different from what we've used in the past, I think that's something as a commission we ought to be thinking about, that these projections will change over time. And if they're insignificant, then okay, we can note that and not do anything. But when I look at kind of the growth curve here, even though it's a straight line, those are big numbers. And I wonder how that's going to impact things like our zoning decisions about multifamily. Do we have enough? How does this look at our projections about what we might need or what would be acceptable for affordable housing? Is that numbers? Everything is built really on that volume, the population projection, which of course is going to become more skeptical as time goes out. But I think we need to be sensitive to putting numbers out there that we're not really sure about, and particularly wondering how that might impact some of the other decisions we've already made and may have to relook at.
Yeah, I think coordination, as we get closer to actually having a number for 2040 that's gone through this whole vetting process, will be really important. And that number will impact how we look at land use, how we look at transportation, how we look at everything when we do our next round of the full comprehensive
We're
plan
dealing with a
review.
moving target, we know that, so we have to deal with that.
Right.
But I think we need to be careful about when we start putting out new numbers or moving from a one-year projection to a future year projection, that we're real careful about how we use those numbers and how we talk about them. People will latch onto that number.
Yeah.
And they will remember that number.
So it's also very important to think about just the comments we heard tonight from the public. They were not based on knowing projections, but being a voice to say, we want to protect our open spaces. We want to make them accessible to the populations that are here. We already know it's going to grow. It's changed so much in just 5 years. So I think that's what the city staffs, at least from the Planning Commission, we need to be able to really hear from the public. And I liked one of the comments tonight was to consider what they've said so far when we're reviewing this plan. So though we may not have a concrete number, we have some voices that can guide us.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yep.
Okay. The next section is the existing inventory. So this is one that you've seen in various forms before. This is just put into one location. There was a lot of discussion at previous commission meetings about balancing natural environment with built environment, and we've heard that consistently through discussions with you as well as in the public comments that we've heard, both the statistically valid ones as well as the informal ones. There is another whole chapter in here about natural environment. This one, we just really wanted to call attention to some of the statistics in the existing inventory of the percent of our parkland that's forested, wetlands, and natural systems. That 80% number was something that we thought was actually pretty astounding, and based on discussions, an important one to call and bring specifically into the plan. The rest of this is relatively unchanged. There were some minor updates to the maps based on the work that we did moving towards the open house, mostly for clarity's sake. And that's kind of it for the existing inventory. We did go into the park classification and service area. Is there any questions on inventory before I keep moving on? I'm going kind of fast on the areas that you've already seen.
It's okay.
Okay. Park classification and service area. You've seen this before as well. We really didn't change anything except we had previously Rhododendron Park and Senior Center. This is a community park. It was already a community park, but there's a recognition that once the boathouse gets built, it's really going to be more of a regional draw. And so we struggled with, is it community? Isn't it regional? Where does it really want to belong? And so we came up with a compromise of basically recognizing that the park itself is community, probably really wants to stay community. It's how people feel about it, care about it, perceive it, but that the boathouse will be a regional draw. And so we basically just added it as a footnote. The other change we made is that City Hall Park and the skate park, we had previously, I think, identified it as a neighborhood park, but the skate park really kind of puts it into that community category. So we did make that change as well. And then the maps changed accordingly. I think I got it everywhere in the text, but there might be, we still have to scrub the text to make sure I didn't miss any spots. All right, any more questions on that before we move to programming?
Yeah, this was just, I wonder about the chart, I guess it's on page 20, it's on 21, where it says Kenmore's Park, the inventory, and it's in a table form with each park and its classification. Is there a way to also include something like how many acres are for each type of classification? How many are neighborhood, how many are regional, how many are community?
To create a summary of acres
Yeah,
within
just a summary of
category.
acres
Okay.
per, just as a sort of an additional, I know all the information is there, but it might be a little easier to,
Yeah,
people
kind of
to
hard to
kinda-
add them all up.
yeah, take a look at that.
Okay. Anything else?
I had another editorial comment. We talked a little bit about this in our original discussion. I worry the validity of our definitions as we go further along, particularly the community designation, as we become more transit-oriented and we have folks being able to access the facilities that are available in Kenmore more easily than they would in the past. That's going to change the character of these. And I think rhododendron is a good example. I have many friends who live as far away as Mill Creek who bring their kids down here for the weekend. That's going to continue to happen. So I think, and it's again an editorial comment, as we move out into a few more years, we need to think about is there really such a thing as a community park anymore when Kenmore is no longer as isolated as it once was. And once you begin to think about that, I think you also have to begin thinking about, well, then how do we finance these? Who pays for this? If this is no longer a community asset in itself, or largely even, there is a financial support obligation that needs to be discussed, probably at the county or state level, because we won't be able to support and maintain things like Rhododendron Park if they become heavily used elsewhere. And that doesn't mean that we need to limit the use, but we're going to have to reflect the level of maintenance that will be required to maintain those properties as they become more heavily used over time.
Yeah, please, your meeting. Interrupt me anytime you'd like.
Yeah, I just had one comment, and it's regarding the map on, well, it's page 25 where it shows the special use facilities and within all park classifications as part of the, it has little stars on it. Okay. I was looking at this map a little closer. So we have Doug Allen Sports Field just outside the city boundaries, Wayne Golf Course, well, former golf course, there, and then we have Big Fin Hill Park in Kirkland, and all those obviously are in other jurisdictions. But are we thinking at all about our connections for Kenmore citizens to those parks facilities that are in other jurisdictions, and possibly trying to incorporate that? I know we have the Burke Gilman that can get folks to Wayne, and obviously Big Fin Hill is right on Juanita Drive, and Doug Allen, I'm a little less certain about connecting to that, but is that something that is part of at least the thinking in terms of our own park system, even though these are not Kenmore parks per se?
We included them and specifically kind of, I guess, counted them when it comes to the walkability map, and that's in that demand and need analysis. So Maureen specifically, especially with Wayne's Golf Course, that turning into a public facility, she specifically went out and walked and looked around to see, can you actually get reasonably from Kenmore up to that facility, so that when we looked at it as having those residents in Kenmore having a walkable park near them, even if it's not your park, it's still a walkable facility. That's probably the most direct relationship of how it's provided. There's lots of language in here about connecting to parks and providing safe connections to parks. So in that context, providing a connection through the city to get to something like Wayne's Golf Course or the Big Fin Hill Park, I think would certainly be, eligible is maybe not the right word, but considered as part of a park system for your city. Doug Allen is up at the very top of a hill. It's actually far more complicated to get to. It has a little bit, so if you were to look at the walkability of only that facility on our overall map, it's actually very limited. So it just doesn't affect your system quite as much. There is actually a couple more off our map boundary that does affect a little bit of your walkability. There's one just to the north of your boundary as well that creeps a little bit into your northernmost residents.
Good. I'm glad to hear it's being considered and incorporated in that fashion. So, anybody else have any?
Okay, park recreation and programming, most of this was context based on what your existing system is, again, what you're doing now. We did make some additional edits just to make it clear based on your comments, where things were actually held at. I don't remember which version you may have seen, but that's now in there. It was more minor, so we didn't necessarily highlight it in red. And the other changes we made to this section were really just focusing and making it clear that you partner currently and would continue to partner in the future. Natural resources is a pseudo-new chapter. I think we've talked, I'm sorry.
Ask a question on the Parks and Recreation. One of the three things you noted, there tended to be a change generally through here with related to more emphasis on programming, which I think is great. I'm glad to see that in here. What I was wondering, though, is to be effective, it has to be, even though we're going to be looking at working with other regions, partnership, there has to be some ownership within the city about who's going to pursue those relationships. Do we have that information? And do we need to say something about it here?
We have a staff person currently. I'm not sure whether it's a long-term or a limited-term position whose responsibility it is to work with the vendors who offer these programming opportunities in the park. So a contact person for that programming. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, I think specifically that, but also if we're going to be partnering with Bothell or some other region, for instance, a joint swim facility or something like that, where does that discussion start? And who owns that within city government?
Well, it would be in several places in city government. Certainly a regional facility would be in front of the city council. As to staff inside the administrative branch, I assume that it would start in the city manager's office, and then if the program were established, it might go to this, as I said, what I think is a limited term position, but as things increased, maybe that would have to become a separate longer term position. I can't really speak to it, but it would start with the city council, and then eventually some part of the administrative branch would take over the management.
Thank you, that helps a lot. What I'm trying to get at here, if we're going to make the point of making this a bigger issue within our plan, the flip side of that is, okay, how are you going to execute that?
There's a specific recommendation under the recommendation section that includes a recognition that some additional funding and focus to programming be part of the future plans. We don't have dollars specifically allocated towards it in our CFP right now, but future updates, we wanted to clarify and set in writing that it was a need, and that future updates should start to look at funding.
Thank you. I missed that. I didn't see that. That's what I would expect to see. Maybe if you could somehow
I'll try and point that out if I didn't make it red. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, for Parks and Rec program, anything else from?
I guess a quick question, and I'm sorry to take us back a little bit, but in the previous section, the very last map, we are showing a graphic for community house. I'm sorry, community building. And there's a icon on the St. Edward State Park property as a community building. Can you remind me what building we have community access to at St. Edwards?
I think that would be the seminary building, where there's an environmental learning center included in it. That is a community
resource.
Okay.
Yeah.
So future state, when the renovations are complete, there would be public
Right.
access there.
Right.
Great, thanks.
And actually, that's a very good point, because I don't think it is currently completed and open.
No.
So that is a good point. We have a little asterisk we put onto these elements for future or in progress. I'll add a little asterisk to that one.
Beforehand, I feel that it was a community building, though. I know that it was used for a lot of private events, such as weddings and whatnot, and it was open to
Okay.
community events. It's just there's this block now, since it's changed ownership and is now
okay,
going
thank you.
through. So it's inactive as a community building for a short period of time until they complete it.
Okay, then I'm probably safe.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, natural resources is the next section. This is predominantly just carried forward from the previous plan. There is a whole chapter in the comprehensive plan that deals with natural environment, protecting of natural environment. There's also the whole shorelines management plan as well. So what this chapter really does is it just sets an introduction to set the importance of natural systems within our parks as a whole, but then defers to those other plans for the context. So all of your wildlife habitat species, all of your endangered species, references to the WIRA 8, references to protection of natural systems and the values they have, all the inventory of those systems is part of other plans. So we just make reference to those. Okay, I will say, I think one other thing that's a little different here is we called specific attention to our 3 larger systems, Swamp Creek, Sammamish River, and Lake Washington. And I think that is actually new from the previous plan. We just sort of beefed it up a little bit more because it was so much of what we heard was protecting natural environment. Any questions or anything that you would comment or want to done differently in this section?
Yeah, just a brief informational one. You mentioned, again, the 120 acres of the 146 acres. I think that's a really important statistic. Can you also include how of the total acres of parkland in the city beyond the city-owned, St. Ed's and the others, can you also include how many of those are natural areas? Just, again, for a sort of point of information. You say city-owned parkland is 146, 120 acres are natural. Can you make the same comparison for all parkland in the city? Is that
possibly?
possible?
I'll go back and look at the documentation and see if we have it clearly separated out. That's something that we might be able to do through the city's GIS.
I'm not sure that we have all of that information at our fingertips easily. I mean, I'm thinking of St. Edward State Park. We have information on portions of it, but I don't know that we have the whole information on the whole acreage.
Right.
Or were you thinking of?
I'm just trying to make some kind of comparison, not only to city-owned parkland, but the large number of acres that are also in the city that aren't owned by the city, but are still considered in our inventory.
Okay, well, if we have the information, we'll
To the extent
certainly
you have
provide
it,
it.
sure,
But if we
okay.
don't have it, we.
If you don't have it, you don't have it.
We don't
yeah.
have it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, vision, goals, and policies. In the interest of time, you've seen this a couple of times. We tried to, in particularly for this section, because there's been a lot of discussion, really highlight all the changes that we did make. If there's any questions, I can let you kind of cruise through that quickly. Okay.
I think we're good there.
All right, demand and need analysis. This is also
I'm
had.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And a need now. I'm trying to orient myself on page
Can you give us
31.
a page number?
Of course. Page 41
Oh, 41. Yeah, I did miss.
in your PDF.
Yeah.
I had a question on page 31, which is in the guiding fundamental section,
Yeah.
in the obstacles piece.
Yes.
There's some new text marked in red that I didn't quite understand the wording of in the first paragraph under obstacles in red. That begins with the broad public participation.
Yes.
Everyone?
Revealed a series obstacle. Was that meant to be serious obstacle?
Oh, series of obstacles. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anything else? Okay. Scrolling down to page 41, demand is the start of the demand and need analysis section.
I'm sorry, I have
Yep.
couple of questions. So on page 33, it's another one of those sort of funky wording questions at policy 3.1.1. Identify
Your 33
opportunities.
might be a little different than mine. Policy, sorry, can you get the number again?
3.1.1. identify opportunities to provide access to and views and education of environmental critical areas.
Might be
Yeah,
page 36 on your document.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
I had actually an editorial note there, it maybe should read, identify opportunities to provide access and views to and education about environmentally critical areas.
That sounds better.
That sound okay?
Mhm. And then, right below that, objective 3.2, provide environmentally sustainable, high-quality. Do we have a definition of environmentally sustainable somewhere in the document? There are a few cases where we talk about sustainable design, and I'm just curious to know if.
Yeah, I doubt if there's a definition. There aren't any definitions in the document that I'm aware of. A sustainable would, I think, mean focused for critical areas, at least, on the idea of no net loss and preserving existing functions and values. So to me, that's what sustainability would mean. I don't know if that's what you had in mind.
Well, I want to ensure that we have clarity and where everyone's using or has the same concept in mind throughout. So I was just curious if there was definition somewhere.
Maybe what we could do is amend the policy to include the thoughts behind the idea of sustainability in that policy.
That would be good.
Okay.
Thanks.
And
This is P
Point
3.2.
okay, sustainable, expand on concept.
Okay.
Right, because later in that section, it has sustainable design measures and sustainable practices, so just curious if
And
there was.
sustainable equipment.
You're right, sustainable, if there were some guidelines or best practices related to that, so.
Right,
that
or
we know.
different words.
Or different,
Maybe
yeah, right,
it's,
so we're all on the same page.
yeah, right.
Okay.
I think the notion of linking that to no net loss, I think is an important issue here, because you could define sustainable in many, many different ways for many, many different purposes. But I think the regulations and what we already have incorporated elsewhere related to no net loss, I think that's much more specific.
Okay. Others?
Yeah, I had one on goal P.P-5 about equitable opportunities and policy P5.1.6 about all future capital improvement projects have an allowance for art and cultural elements. Are you talking about something like a 1% for art or something along those lines? And is it just a sort of an aspirational idea, or what?
The city already has provisions in the municipal
there?
code for 1% for art.
Okay.
So it's aspirational, I guess, in that we want to include it, but the provision is already in existence.
Including for parks and recreation facilities, okay.
In fact, just as an aside, there is already an effort right now to use 1% for the art funds for Log Boom and Squires.
Okay. So that's just basically kind of elaborating on what's current practice then. Okay, great, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, demand and need analysis, chapter 4, starting on page 41.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, no
have
problem.
one more. So, policy 7.1.6, require new development impacting park service delivery to pay its fair share of the costs of providing new park and recreation facilities. Again, I'm wondering what fair share is.
It probably has to do with impact fees. I think this is what this policy is headed toward. And fair share is determined by an analysis of how much, it's a more complicated exercise. You figure out how much you need and how much new growth is contributing to that need. And then you figure out what a share would be. That's what your fee should be. And that is what determines what the fair share is.
We could make reference to the document, because there's a document that's referenced in a couple of places that it will be an appendix that defines how the impact fee is calculated. I think we just probably want to tie fair share to the impact fee and reference that document.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, any others? All right. I think I'm back on page 41. Okay. There were some questions when we did some internal reviews about benchmark. What is benchmarks? What does that mean? And what are we comparing it to? So we've tried to expand on that a little bit. I think we might still need to expand a little bit more on what benchmarks means. I think there's still a little bit of question in there. So that's part of our task that we still want to go back and further define and make that clear to more layman's term. It's a little bit planner speak right now. And then there's really just been kind of some fine tuning of some of the various elements in this plan. So if there's no questions just on the table, I'll go into the park and recreation trends. Okay. From a trend standpoint, not highlighted in red, but a number of just editorial comments were made and changes made to better define where some of these trends came from. We tried to really integrate sources of where some of the documentation and these trends and directly tie them to the documents and the places that we drew them from. We added specifically a trend under local trends that is accommodating e-bikes, car share drop-off areas, and newer transportation modes, because that's something that came out of your previous discussion and was very relevant to things we struggle with today in parks planning and design. And then it's not highlighted as a bullet, this is an editorial note, but the focus on keeping youth active at the bottom of page 46. That is a bullet that should follow under accommodating e-bike. So that is just another trend that was identified. Any questions? Okay, moving on to community interests. We integrated at least a couple of the graphs and these first two graphs came from the statistically valid survey. That was the one in 2019 that had a high number of respondents and had a lot of the statistical data that we used in developing the trends and the demand and need analysis. So we integrated a couple of those documents and the more relevant graphs directly into this plan. The rest, of course, is still going to be part of an appendix. And then this is where you see on page 49 a number of additional comments and discussion about some of the results, both from that statistically valid survey and also bringing in the informal survey and open house comments that were part of the PROS plan update process. Again, we keep it at a very high level in the report itself because all of the detail is provided in the appendix, or at least will be. Okay, any comments to that section before I move on to benchmarks?
Maybe, I'm sorry, just a quick comment about, there obviously people want, connection to the waterfront. They seem to want to swim, or maybe it's indoors. There are provisions, I think, for swimming at, say, Log Boom Park as part of its, I know the beach expansion is part of the Log Boom plan. Log Boom Park is a sort of a designated, swimming area. Is that contemplated too for Log Boom? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but I would be very surprised.
Because if it was.
Just because I think that also has some provision for hand-carried watercraft. I don't know that I'm remembering all this accurately, but not for example, roping off a designated swimming area, I don't think is in the plan.
Okay, people want indoor pools, they don't want to swim in cold Lake Washington.
The community results were geared more towards indoor pools and the aquatic centers more specifically. The Log Boom Park Master Plan does have basically an expansion of that gravelly beach kind of area to provide more access for swimming.
Yeah.
I agree with, I don't know if it's actually roped off or not.
Okay. We could have our own polar bear plunge every January. Thank you. Or not. Never mind.
I will say you don't see a lot of red text under the key findings in this section, because while we had a lot of comments at the open house, and even the responses from the informal survey, they fell very much in line with what we've been hearing. So it was really a great touch point to make sure that what we thought we heard, what we've been hearing through these previous processes is still very much in touch with what people were saying today. Any other questions before I move on to benchmarks? Okay, I had no changes to benchmarks, so unless you have questions, I'm jumping it and moving on to population growth. The only change to population growth really was in that projection, and so this is another place where we'll make sure to specifically reference and not even as a footnote. I think it's important to put it right in with the document exactly how we came up with the number, so we'll beef that up. Geographic distribution, we had a little bit of changes under walkability, so I actually jumped all the way to page 60 where we have the red text. And this is something specifically that we talked about internally quite a bit. Back in our inventory, we actually used to have a line item for local connections, but it wasn't defined and no one really knew what that was. We removed it specifically from the inventory because it's not truly inventoried in terms of acres or miles or even identified on maps, but we wanted to still reference that they existed and were used. So this is where we put that content. And then the walkability map is where you'll see specifically how we tie in Wayne's Golf Course, Big Fin. You see the yellow of the walkability well beyond your own boundaries. We originally at one point had cut it off at the city boundary, but at the same time we have the data and I think it just shows a more complete picture.
Just to comment on that, I know we had discussed earlier on maybe improving, say, access to parks through improvement to sidewalks and crosswalks and other means of that way. And I know Debbie was noting that, and potentially that would help expand this walkability. Do you know if that is still being pursued? And if it is, how that might change this graph, and if that graph will be, it probably won't be updated in this plan, but maybe for the next one.
So the plan has been updated. The graph has been updated to account for the future, the Juanita that's under construction. That walkability along that Juanita corridor hadn't been in the previous plan.
Okay.
It is now. The toll pipeline was already included. So really that's the only change to, well, there was, yeah, that's basically the only change. There was a little bit of new land added in the Swamp Creek boundary that's really hard to tell at a scale, but the walkability changed ever so slightly as a result of that. So it's been updated for those couple of elements. The transportation plan has additional planned kind of longer term sidewalk improvement maps. Because they're longer term and not in process, we did not bring those into this map as also future projects. That is something I think to be considered maybe as future PROS plan updates happen. If that's something as a desire to show proposed as its own set of walkability maps for those systems.
Okay.
We don't have it in at this time.
All right, thank you.
The 73% within 10-minute walk of a park, if to the extent we go and make all the local sort of trail connection improvements, how will that make a difference in terms of the percentage? In other words, better connections, how much would that increase the 73% walkability percentage?
So I think if you look into the detail along on the Trust for Public Land about how these numbers are conveyed, the 73% really is there a route you can physically get to, right? Not is it a
whether
safe
it's
route.
current or
It's
future?
current, just whether it's current. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a safe route. So if I can walk along a shoulder or along a road, that counts to your 73%. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a sidewalk or a connection that I can feel comfortable
Safe,
taking my
right.
stroller on.
Okay.
So with a lot of the improvements we're proposed are really focusing on safe, and we tried to make it clear in the plan that it's safe routes to parks.
Yes, that was made clear later.
Yeah, because there is a lot of walkability and actually a significant amount of walkability. Where I think some of those other connection projects will really help is where streams, where there's, some barriers perhaps to walkability right now, those sidewalk, those safe routes become not just safe, but also barrier-free routes. Your actual number is going to change a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be that
Not
significant because you
materially,
have
okay.
steep ravines, you have things that without significant types of projects would be difficult to
Right.
achieve.
So to get to 100%, it's going to basically take new parks and recreation facilities to fill that, what is it, 27% gap, essentially? And I know that's addressed later
Yep.
on in the plan, so that seems like a reasonable aspirational goal is 100%.
100%?
Like the target zero for ped bike safety. I mean, I don't have a handy slogan. Anybody got a good slogan? Anyways, that's, I think, a good aspirational
Okay.
goal, in my opinion.
Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. So I am scrolling down to recreation programming. I'm on page 67. And just a quick time check, we're at 8 o'clock. Are we doing okay on time? Okay. So the only change we made was to just reiterate that partnership approach. If there are no other comments, I'll jump to participation rates. This has a fair amount of your red text. The big change here was, one of your questions was our data on the participation rates for the Little League and the Soccer Association were based on previous years, I think 1 or 2 years old. And so one of the things the intern did was go and try and update that data and get a little bit more detailed in where that data came from. So this red text, he has his own, there's a summary report that goes into a lot more detail. That'll be as part of an appendix as well, but we pulled the relevant information. It didn't actually change the overall need, but I think it provides a much stronger context for that need.
Does it address a projection into the future, or is that sort of beyond the scope or ability to project youth sports participation?
Yeah, so what we do, and one of the other comments you had was to actually show the math. So somewhere in here, I do show the math. What we basically do is we take their participation rates, we take some of their projected, what their need is currently, and how many people participate currently. And then you, from a planning standpoint, you basically say, with this current population, you have this number of youth, our population is growing by 25%, therefore if you could assume an expected 25% increase in those participation rates. So we just kind of take a direct, if their growth rate matches your city's growth rate, here's how many additional fields you would need. That's further divided in here into what the number, some of the added data that the intern was able to really delve into was the difference between if they just have their current number of fields and you grow, what would those fields be, versus if they had what they'd really like to support a very robust, healthy, be able to have fields whenever they want them fields, what would those numbers be? And so there's some nuances in here that wasn't in the previous version.
Okay, I know we do plans every 6 years because obviously things can change, participation can do any, none of us can predict what that's going to be in the future. So I guess that's fine for purposes of this plan, knowing that's going to evolve and change in the future. So a new sport
if
comes
it
in
is an
that's really
important thing
popular,
that's really important, some of the things you can do now that we have this data is to try to continue to track the data. That will give you more stronger view of growth If that's kind of something as a, whether it's a staff or whether there's continued internship or just having a simple survey that you can send out and ask your groups to help track and support their own enrollment rates.
Sure.
And down on page 72 is where we describe exactly what we do. The current number of fields by 25%, which is your expected growth rate, and you can see with the math how we come up with it. All right, any other questions? I'd be moving on to recommendations, chapter 5 on page 76. So one of the things I think that's still in our task to go back is looking at, and you'll see this in the red text in the introduction, what we're trying to do is really highlight and be transparent that the demand and need analysis looks at all your needs, everything you could think of, everything we've heard, every which way we can look at need for parks and recreation. That doesn't mean, and then we summarize those in the key findings. So the key finding is not every single need you had, it's just what really rose to the top. That recommendations are then what rises to the top out of all those key findings. So there is not a direct connection between every key finding and a specific recommendation and a specific project and a specific CIP or CFP project number to go along with it. It's not that direct of a correlation. We try to really look at what people have told us they want and need, what the priorities are, what your resources are, and try to balance all of that out. So we've started to try and make some statements to that extent. I think we'll probably want to beef those up a little bit more because someone who's trying to really line up from one direct to the next will have a hard time finding some of those. Same way with your policies. Some of your policies reflect specific projects. Not every project has a policy. Every policy should have a project if it makes this direct connection. So some of that cleanup I think we still might need to do. Does that make sense to everybody and seem like the good direction to go? Okay. One specific recommendation in here that we wanted to call attention to and have a discussion about, so unless there's any questions, beyond this was moving to page 78. This is the Morelands Neighborhood Trail Connection. This is a new project that was part of your previous plan, but I don't know that we really discussed it in any great detail, and so this is one that we stepped back and really looked at what we're trying to accomplish. I think there's a good discussion to have, and we'd like some specific feedback from you on this one. So do you want to kind of describe this a little bit?
So I'm going to come up here to the map because I think this makes it.
Thank you.
We might have to walk it down.
Was appropriate.
And I will say that what we did in this one is we left it in but said a route is to be determined and it's envisioned as off-road, but it could be anywhere at any, we just kind of highlighted the unknowns for it to have really the discussion with you on what do you think.
Well, having walked those hillsides for 20 years campaigning for all the people that have sat on the city council, I can't imagine trying to create a trail through the different properties. Some of the hills are really steep. I mean, I could book up them 20 years ago, but I don't do that anymore. Maybe I should. It'd be interesting because it is a really pretty area. A lot of, bird activity but it's just steep. I mean, even the properties that are built with houses have these long driveways that are a mile long, up. You should go walk it, then you would have some opinions about it.
A group hike there?
Sure, we'll take a little field trip next summer.
Top of the hill, walk down.
No, you have to go up. You have to go from rhododendron up to Morelands.
I've done both.
You're a little electric scooter, and if we had scooter paths, that might work.
Is there feedback or survey data indicating that people are looking for park-to-park connections? Trying to imagine the use case where I'm enjoying myself in Rhododendron Park and I say, gosh, I want to go now to another park, versus I think maybe what a more immediate need is residential areas to parks as far as safe travel.
Yeah, I think the idea, and believe me, I was not in these discussions, but I think the idea was more of a trail. This is an area, if you look at the geographic distribution, that has sort of a shortfall of some amenities. So the idea of an off-road trail, I'm not sure you would be setting out to walk from one to the other, except in the context of enjoying
The hike,
a hike.
the trail.
How much, or if any, public land is there in this area? Is it all private, or what's?
I think it's
I'm not familiar with it
probably-
like as Carol is.
Yeah,
but-
I think most of it, and again, there's no route established. The
Right.
idea is,
No.
do we want to look for a route? I'm not sure how much public land. There may be no public land. There are a lot of easements, I'm sure, natural areas.
There is also another approach you could take, and I think the transportation plan already has Simons Road and some other potential like sidewalk network connectivity improvements. As much off-road as you possibly could, or to consider some potential off-road connections. But if it's really just sort of a step back from the walk through the ravine to say, is this something that should be a focus in this area for recreation, trail, or other connectivities? Should parks look for something specifically in this area? There are also lots of just general language in here about connectivities and working with public works. So certainly on-road connections are covered in other elements and in other recommendations and other CFP numbers. So there is really just a question too of, is this an area that we want to focus on specifically? And do you want to focus on this as a natural off-road type of a connection or not? You could tackle either question.
Excuse me, personally, I don't feel that there'd be a downside, at least to look into it, maybe see the kind of interest that there is in the public for this and the kind of feasibility that it would require to achieve this. Like Carol here, I've run the hills. I'd run them, and I'd also walk them, and I've walked from Morelands to Rhododendron, and I've all the routes. So I know the routes pretty well. And I
Never run them,
Oh,
so
oh,
I'll
yeah.
just offer that.
I've run them, and they are very steep, I can tell you that. But I also know that the other routes, the current routes that we have to get from Morelands to Rhododendron, a large majority of those routes would require you to walk along the busy roadways, which aren't always the safest. And they also go a lot further out of the way. You have to kind of go around to hook up with the main road to find that direct route down to the park, or go out to Juanita Way and find that direct route to the park. So this might kind of make it more accessible, at least decrease the travel time that it would take between park to park, and hopefully increase the safety as well. So personally, I feel that it wouldn't hurt to at least start looking into it to see if it's feasible and wanted.
So I'm just wondering about these different recommendations under number 1. they aren't numbered or prioritized in any way. And so I'm wondering how they would be treated, because it may be that there are some that serve more community members than others, or I don't know if in terms of, I agree with Nathan that it would be nice to be able to look into that off-road trail. I don't know if there's a cost to doing that, and whether we need to look at whether there's something that's more accessible and serves more folks where we would use money for that priority. So is that something that we would just submit these ideas to the council and then they would prioritize them based on available finances?
They're prioritized to some extent by where they appear in the CFP. So I think both of the consideration of acquisition and feasibility is a midterm effort, and then, which I think was 7 to 12 years, and then the actual construction, if it was feasible, was a long-term, so 13 plus years. Juliet's going to correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm checking on it now. So potential acquisition easements, agreements to actually find a route or get anything set in place was set in your midterm, so that's 7 to 13 years, and then any development would then be the 14 to 20 years. So we've basically pushed the priority down the road a little bit. What that would mean would be sometime in that 7 to 13 years, you would try to identify an initial project that would look at feasibility and figure out, is there a route that even makes sense? That would be ideally in the earlier, like in the 7 to 8 year range, and then start to work on any acquisitions, easements. If there is a route that even makes sense, would be more in that later portion of that mid-year.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things that occur, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just said thank you.
One of the things that occurred to me, listening to the conversation here, I'm not sure what the purpose we're looking to solve, or the problem we're looking to solve, or the public good we're looking to create. I like the idea of the trails. I'm not sure it solves the specific issues we're looking at. But what occurred to me just off the top of my head, we know right now that we have, I think, and I hear other people say, a developing problem in St. Edwards, where it is so heavily used by people who enjoy being able to bike through those, and that creates some real tension between those people who want to walk through the park and enjoy the park in a different way. We've reached probably a critical, or maybe beyond a critical point where that's becoming a real issue in St. Edwards. If there's the opportunity to build an alternative biking experience in these steep areas, which is what are attractive to the people who are using St. Edwards in this way in the future, not a short-term goal, but that might be something to look at in a future parks plan. If we could develop that, attracts more people to the city. There's a lot of people who use St. Edwards now who I think may use facilities and may be attracted to Kenmore because of that. So that might be a way to offload some of that off of St. Edwards, but also make an amenity that would be appealing to people who want to live in.
Yeah, I only want to make the point that in those steep slope areas, any kind of a trail, if you're thinking of mountain biking, is probably not something you could even do under the code, but certainly a trail of another surface, or I think that's feasible to look at for sure.
So I think that's the main point, is if we move away from our first thought, which is, would this help with connectivity, the answer to that, without looking at it any deeper than that, is probably no. But there may be other uses that we could do there. It may not be a short-term use, but in the medium or long term, there may be something we could do there that would be attractive and be an amenity to people who live in the city or visit the city.
I also think it's kind of important how we've already discussed that there's kind of a decreasing amount, or kind of the facilities that we have, the natural facilities that we have, we only have a limited amount. So we only have so many parks, and we've seen that development is expanding and taking over a lot of these more natural resources. And I know that stretch along there, it's zoned the way you said, how it's zoned the way it is, because it's a critical area, but it's also kind of off-holding some of that development. And I think it would be beneficial to look into maybe acquiring some of that land now, because it is still untouched and still so natural. as opposed to waiting later, and when that might have disappeared and is no longer an opportunity for us. Because as you said, we've seen how a lot of these natural resources that we have in natural facilities are decreasing, and that is still something that is available to us right now.
So I saw 3 heads nodding to say, leave it in for now, and we'll check feasibility in the future. Are there more than 3, or where are we?
Well, one sort of question I had, maybe a comment, is would this in any way help walkability towards Inglemore High School, and does it have any benefits, or is this envisioned more as sort of like a recreational trail? I mean, I know you can go up Simons Road, or like you say, you can go to 155th, Juanita. I know there are other walkable routes to Inglemore. Would this have any benefits for?
I'm sure any kind of a connection would have a benefit. There's no reason.
But it would be sort of secondary to...
Well, it would be an off-road trail, and some people might find that really attractive. Others might find that it wasn't something they wanted to do. They wanted to stick to the sidewalks.
Sure.
There's no real way to answer that, except it provides an additional connection to the
okay.
area.
Okay.
I think that it would really depend on where it ended up going, right? So those who are close to that trail, as it gets developed, would have much better connectivity and be quicker and safer to get to it. Those who are a little farther away might still find the sidewalk or roadway network more convenient.
But it would potentially be a connection improvement. Okay. I'd be open to keeping it in as a study item.
It's not going to hurt anything.
I mean, we're not talking huge resources to study it, correct? At least not in the near term, right?
So what we did do then in that case is we made reference that it could be separated from roadways as much as possible as a preference, but we left it open that it could also be an on-road type of a connection. So as it's developed in the future, it could really go either way. Okay, the other change I made into some of these was just to be very explicit when there was something proposed as a recommendation, but it was not included in the CFP. To again, help with anyone who's trying to connect all the dots and wonder why a dot's not connected. There was some reference in a previous plan, and it's not highlighted in red because it was one thing removed that I did want to call attention to. And actually, I'm not entirely sure which version it made it into, and you maybe didn't see it at all, but there was a discussion internally about the walkways and waterways, and of course the goal has always really been to connect essentially Log Boom to Squires Landing. One of the elements that came out of in discussions was, does that also extend down to St. Edwards? And so that may have been in some previous versions or may have been part of some of your previous discussions. We did remove that from this plan, and looking at how would you get there, what would it do? It kind of duplicates the work that's been done on Juanita Boulevard. And again, so it was a similar discussion we just had with Morelands, but in this case, because Juanita Boulevard is there, it really provides that connection. We didn't feel adding yet another connection through a lot of protected wetlands, for example, or trying to get along waterfront properties was going to be as feasible. We did beef up some discussion and programming, so I'm going to jump to page 81. There's a recommendation for programming support. It is a new project, although I believe it was in your previous version that you may have seen. This is the specific reference to having some dollars and some focus on programming and budgeting for programming. What we added in the red text was just reminding that it is primarily by others through a partnership approach, and that specific funding for that is not included in this CFP. So again, the things that are not included in the CFP are things that we think were important, people have said of important, have been discussions with you. We just don't have specific dollars attached to them, and that would then be picked up in the next update to the PROS plan. If it continues to be an important element, that's where you would put it into a CFP. Any questions on the recommendations chapter?
I just like the way you added in that particular bullet about marketing materials, media release, getting the word out. I think that's an important role for the city to have too. And even though they're not directly doing a lot of the programming, letting residents know what's available not only in Kenmore, but even, I think we've had this discussion at prior meetings about getting the word out to our folks.
Yeah, even if you don't do it, right?
Exactly,
Yes.
just knowing that it's available.
Okay. So implementation, if there's no other questions, I didn't change anything. Of course, you're welcome to still ask questions. Same with existing financial capacity remained the same. And the CFP remained the same. So in jumping all the way down to level of service, this is not in red text, and I'm so one thing, for whatever reason, and I apologize, in your plan, the title under the category of these level of service calculations says 2039 and has some dollars assigned to them. Those have now been updated to 2040.
Can you give us a page?
Sorry, yes, page 98 and 99.
Oh, wow. Gotta zoom.
The last 2 pages we have, so the only change I made to level of service was updating it from the 2035 date to the 2040 date. And I have to apologize, it says 2039, but I believe it's supposed to say 2040. We went through some various couple of renditions of this. So also not in red text, because it's a table, it just didn't quite work out, but those numbers were updated.
Okay, we've gone through it. Any remaining questions or comments? Otherwise, what we would do, our next steps would be to take your feedback from tonight. Juliet had mentioned a couple places where we needed to double check some things. We need to put together the voluminous appendices and then bring the whole thing back for your final review.
Sounds good.
I do have a question. Possibly not related, but immediately behind the Safeway and to the right of the People's Storage is an open lot. Do you know what the ownership of that is? It private ownership?
It is private ownership, right. Yeah, they've come in periodically with some sort of pre-development ideas, but don't have an active application.
Yeah, and that looks like a perfect location. Eminent domain, perhaps?
Okay, anything else for us tonight to address?
No.
Okay.
So your next meeting, which is November 19th, is the public hearing on the accessory dwelling unit regulations. So then your December 3rd meeting will be the final, as I said, the final version of the pros plan. And it's possible that you'll be able to make final recommendations on both of these things. And then you can enjoy the holidays having full satisfaction that you've done a great job.
Okay.
If recommendations are made at these next couple of meetings, then city council presentations would occur in January.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for the good of the order from anyone?
Lori, thank you for providing the little table on all of our terms and when we're
Yeah.
up for reelection or
Yep.
recommendations. Thank you.
Did that get emailed out or something?
It did. It's
It
just
did.
in an email.
Into the regular planning commission email.
no, I didn't get it, so I think
Oh.
maybe you may not have my email.
Well, it would have been your City Planning
okay.
Commission email, not personal email.
I'll have to check.
So, okay. Let me know if you didn't get it, and I'm happy to send it out.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.